I took care of my mother for 4 years while she was sick, only to be shocked when I found out she left her $50 million fortune to my brother, who never visited her. In response, I stopped her care and financial support. A few days later, she called, begging me to return, but my reply left her speechless. The home was filled with the soothing aroma of pancakes on a crisp spring morning. A warm golden glow filled the room as sunlight streamed in through the kitchen windows. With her favorite stuffed animal nestled beneath her arm, 6-year-old Lily sat cross-legged on the floor of the living room. Her father, a gentle and jovial man, was standing at the stove flipping pancakes with skill. These weren't just any pancakes though. They were his well-known Sunday specials, each one fashioned into a humorous face that never failed to make Lily giggle. "Come assist your old man with these masterpieces. Lily, princess," he cried, brandishing the spatula like a wand. The place was filled with excitement as his voice was full of love and vitality. With her laughter echoing like a bell, Lily sprung to her feet, leaving her rabbit on the carpet and ran to the kitchen. Her mother, who was always well-prepared and affectionate, was preparing the table with care while humming a gentle melody that complemented the serene ambiance. It seemed as though this moment would last forever because everything was so wonderful. However, things can change drastically in life. The spatula fell from her father's grasp and clattered to the floor as Lily arrived in the kitchen. He grasped his chest and stumbled backward, his once happy face turning to one of misery. Lily's wide eyes were fixed on him, and her tiny face was filled with terror and confusion. Time seemed to stop. Her mother hurried forward, panic taking the place of her normal composure. "Now, Lily, call for help." Her mother's voice broke with urgency. The ambulance's loud siren, the paramedics' frantic cries, and the sight of her mother's tears as they hurried to the hospital all blended together as Lily's tiny hands fumbled for the phone. Hours passed in a sterile, frigid hospital hallway, the once bright morning fading under an encroaching cloud of fear. The doctor's solemn face conveyed everything Lily's heart wasn't prepared to hear when he finally showed up. The absence Lily's idyllic youth came to an end that spring morning, and a life tainted by loss and unsolved questions began. Following the unexpected death of her father, Lily's once happy home became uncomfortably quiet. Months passed in a haze of quiet dinners and school days until her mother, in need of solace, joined a widowed parent support group. She first met Richard there. He reminded Lily a little of her father since he was gentle, compassionate, and exuded a calm strength. He eventually established himself as a recognizable figure, and the house began to feel a new type of warmth as a result of his visits. Richard and Lily's mother were married in less than a year. He brought consistent patience and a sincere attempt to get to know Lily with him when he moved into their house. He would offer to read her bedtime tales, sit with her while she worked on her homework, and even attempt to make her father's renowned pancakes. Lily couldn't get rid of the impression that Richard was entering a space that wasn't his, no matter how hard he tried. No amount of Richard's goodwill could make up for how much she missed her father. As the family gathered for dinner one evening, Lily's mother made a momentous surprise. She clutched her hands together, her face glowing with joy. "You're going to be a big sister, Lily, my love," she cried. Lily's fork froze in mid-air as the words lingered. She struggled to comprehend the news as she gazed at her mother. Lily could only feel a hollow hole in her chest, but her mother's beaming face made it obvious that this was supposed to be a happy time. After losing her father, she wasn't prepared to share her mother. After several months, baby Tommy was born. The dynamic of the household changed drastically as soon as he arrived. Lily watched as her mother poured every ounce of her energy into Tommy's care. "These early years are crucial," her mother would say, dismissing Lily's need for attention. Everything revolved around Tommy. For Lily, it felt like she was disappearing, her place in the family shrinking with each passing day. As Tommy grew, so did their mother's obsession with him. She fussed over his meals, documented his every milestone, and catered to his every need. At first, Lily tried to understand. Tommy was still a baby after all. But as the years passed, the imbalance became glaringly obvious. Her lunches were forgotten, her school events overlooked, and her small victories went unnoticed. If she dared to speak up, her mother's response was always the same. "I'm sorry, sweetheart. Tommy had a doctor's appointment," or "Tommy needed help with his art project." The excuses piled up, and with each one, Lily felt herself retreating further into the shadows. Richard saw it all. He'd catch Lily sitting alone at the dinner table or quietly playing in her room while her mother hovered over Tommy. Concern etched deeper lines into his face as he watched his wife pour all her energy into one child, leaving the other to fend for herself. Richard tried to make up for it in his own way. He attended Lily's curate classes, cheered loudly when she earned her belt, and even helped her with her math homework after long days at work. His efforts didn't go unnoticed by Lily, who began to see him as an ally in a house where she often felt invisible. But the growing favoritism didn't sit well with Richard. Tension simmered between him and Lily's mother, and their disagreements became more frequent. "Sarah, you've got 2 kids, not just one," he'd say gently, but firmly during their late-night discussions. "Lily needs you too." "She's fine," her mother would reply dismissively. "She's independent, like her father. Tommy, on the other hand, needs more attention. He's sensitive." The breaking point came one evening when Richard suggested signing Tommy up for Little League. "He needs to interact with other kids," Richard argued at the dinner table. "It'll help him build confidence." "Absolutely not," Sarah snapped, her fork clattering onto her plate. "Do you know how dangerous baseball can be? He could get hurt." "Sarah, you can't protect him from everything," Richard replied, his frustration evident. "He needs to learn resilience." "What's next?" "Wrapping him in bubble wrap." The argument escalated, their voices growing louder as Lily quietly pushed her food around her plate. She wished she could disappear. Finally, Sarah slammed her hands on the table. "I won't risk my son's safety." "Richard, if you don't understand that, maybe you don't understand me at all." Richard sighed, running a hand through his hair. "It's not just about Tommy, it's about Lily too. She deserves your time, your love." "She's not getting it." But Sarah's face hardened. "Tommy needs me more," she said, ending the discussion. That night, as Lily lay in bed, she heard muffled voices through the walls. Her parents' disagreement echoed her own silent thoughts. In this house, Tommy came first, and she was just a quiet afterthought. As Lily entered her teen years, she began to carve out a life of her own. She threw herself into her studies, participated in extracurricular activities, and spent hours practicing karate where she earned a steady stream of new belts. Though her home life remained turbulent, she found with Richard, Lily felt seen and valued even as her mother's attention stayed firmly fixed on Tommy. Meanwhile, Tommy's behavior took a sharp turn. The once admirable child became messy and entitled, leaving his toys and clothes strewn about the house. His room resembled a disaster zone, yet their mother never reprimanded him. Instead, she turned to Lily with an exasperated sigh. "Be a dear and tidy up your brother's room. You know how sensitive he is." Lily's resentment simmered just below the surface. Richard wouldn't stay silent. One evening, he walked into the living room to find Lily struggling to fold Tommy's clothes. "She's not his maid, Sarah," Richard said firmly, his voice cutting through the tense air. "He's still young, Richard," her mother replied dismissively, waving her hand. "He needs my help, and Lily doesn't." Richard shot back, his voice rising. "You can't keep coddling him. He'll never learn responsibility if you keep cleaning up his messes." Literally and figuratively, the argument escalated, years of pent-up frustration spilling out. "You don't understand him," Sarah shouted, her eyes blazing. "He's different. He needs more from me than Lily ever did." "And what about Lily?" Richard retorted, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "She's been fending for herself since she was 6. You've ignored her long enough, Sarah." Sarah's face twisted with anger. Then, as if on cue, her tears began to flow. "You love her more than your own son," she accused, her voice cracking. Richard's shoulders slumped, the fight draining from him. "This isn't about favorites," he said quietly. "It's about fairness, and you're blind to it." That was the turning point. From that day forward, Richard emotionally distanced himself from Sarah. Though he stayed in the house, the warmth between them faded. He redirected his energy toward Lily, supporting her as she navigated her teen years. He drove her to college tours, helped her apply for scholarships, and celebrated her every achievement with pride. But the growing divide between Richard and Sarah hung over the household like a dark cloud. For Lily, it was both a blessing and a curse. Richard's unwavering support helped her thrive, but the tension at home made her feel like she was walking a fragile tightrope. Each day brought new cracks in the foundation of their family, and deep down, Lily knew it was only a matter of time before it all crumbled. High school graduation was a bittersweet milestone for Lily. She stood in her cap and gown, scanning the crowd of cheering parents and classmates. Her eyes landed on Richard, who was beaming with pride, clapping enthusiastically. Beside him, her mother sat stiffly, her eyes glued to her phone. Lily sighed, knowing exactly who she was texting: Tommy's babysitter. The moment felt hollow, a reflection of the emotional distance that had grown between her and her mother over the years. Later that evening, Richard pulled Lily aside, his voice filled with excitement. "I've been saving up for this," he said, handing her a folder filled with college brochures. "You can go wherever you want." "Lily, the sky's the limit." Before Lily could respond, her mother stormed into the room, her face set in a scowl. "You can't be serious, Richard," she snapped. "That money should be saved for Tommy's future. He'll need it more." Richard's expression hardened, a rare but familiar look that signaled the conversation was over. "This is non-negotiable, Sarah. I've made my decision." With Richard's unwavering support, Lily chose Marshall University in West Virginia. It was far enough to give her a fresh start, but close enough for the occasional visit. When moving day arrived, Richard helped her load boxes into the car, his excitement contagious. Her mother, however, stayed home, claiming Tommy was too anxious about her leaving to make the trip. College life was everything Lily had hoped for. Free from the suffocating atmosphere of her childhood home, she blossomed. She made friends, excelled in her classes, and found a sense of belonging she hadn't felt in years. For the first time, she felt truly free, unshackled from the burden of being the forgotten child. Meanwhile, Tommy's life took a different trajectory. He became increasingly withdrawn, spending his days gaming or hanging out with friends who encouraged his bad habits. On the rare occasions Lily visited home, she was struck by the stark contrast between their lives. Tommy barely acknowledged her presence, his pale face illuminated by the glow of his computer screen. Her mother continued to make excuses for him. "He's going through a rough phase," she'd say, brushing off any concerns. During one visit, Richard confided in Lily over dinner. "I've tried everything, Lily," he said, his voice heavy with exhaustion. "Tommy refuses to take responsibility, and your mother won't let me intervene. It's like hitting a brick wall." Lily nodded, her heart aching for Richard. She could see the toll it was taking on him, but she also knew she couldn't fix what was broken at home. The call came late one evening, shattering the fragile balance of Lily's life. Richard had collapsed at work, another massive heart attack. By the time Lily reached the hospital, it was too late. Her biggest supporter, the man who had stood by her when no one else did, was gone. The funeral was a somber affair, though not for the reasons Lily expected. Her mother put on a dramatic display, sobbing loudly and clutching her chest, recounting what a wonderful husband Richard had been. Lily watched in silence. Husband Richard had been. Lily watched in silence, her stomach twisting. She knew the truth. Those tears were more about her mother's fear of losing financial security than the loss of a partner. Tommy showed up in wrinkled khakis and a polo shirt, spending most of the service glued to his phone. "He's grieving in his own way," their mother said, making excuses as always. Lily could barely contain her resentment. Richard had deserved better than this. After the funeral, the cracks in their family's finances became impossible to ignore. Richard had been the sole breadwinner, and without his steady income, their mother quickly found herself overwhelmed. Bills piled up and the once pristine home began to show signs of neglect. One evening, Lily returned home for a visit and found her mother pacing the living room, wringing her hands. "Lily," she began, her voice trembling, "we're running out of money. Your savings are almost gone, and my pension barely covers the basics. I need your help." Lily stared at her mother, the weight of the request sinking in. Part of her wanted to refuse to remind her mother of the years of neglect and favoritism, but as she looked into her mother's tired, desperate eyes, she couldn't bring herself to turn away completely. "How much do you need?" she asked, her voice steady despite the knot forming in her stomach. $1,500 a month, her mother said quietly, the number hitting Lily like a punch to the gut. It was a significant portion of her salary, but she nodded anyway. Lily set up the monthly transfers, each payment a reminder of the heavy burden she'd chosen to bear. Though it wasn't easy, she convinced herself it was the right thing to do. But deep down, a flicker of resentment remained. This was never how things were supposed to be. Lily's visits home became increasingly strained as Tommy's lifestyle spiraled further out of control. He spent his days gaming, drinking, and lounging on the couch, showing no interest in finding work. During one visit, he proudly introduced his fiancée, Candy, a woman whose long acrylic nails and flashy outfits made her seem more suited for reality TV than real life. Candy barely looked up from her phone to acknowledge Lily. Within days, she had made herself at home, treating Lily's groceries as her own and leaving empty snack bags scattered around the house. One afternoon, while Lily was unpacking groceries, Candy popped her gum and casually remarked, "You know this house belongs to Tommy now, right?" Lily froze. "What are you talking about?" Candy smirked. "Your mom signed everything over to him. The house, the savings, everything. There's a will and all that." Lily stormed into the kitchen where her mother was meticulous sorting coupons. "Is it true?" she demanded, her voice trembling. "Did you leave everything to Tommy?" Her mother hesitated, then straightened her shoulders. "Yes, I did," she said calmly. Lily felt like the floor had dropped out from under her. "How could you? I'm the one who's been helping you. I've been sending money every month, fixing this house, while Tommy hasn't lifted a finger." Her mother's face hardened. "Don't you dare speak about your brother that way. You've always been jealous of him, but he's my son. He deserves it." "Jealous?" Lele's voice cracked with disbelief. "You've ignored me my entire life. I've tried to be enough for you, But I never was I? Her mother's next words hit like a sledgehammer. Tommy needs me more than you ever did, and the truth is I never loved you the way I love him. The room spun as Lily stood there, the weight of years of neglect and favoritism crashing down all at once. She had spent her life trying to earn her mother's love only to be told she was never enough. With shaking hands, Layla grabbed her purse. "You made your choice," she said, her voice steady despite the tears threatening to fall. "Now you can live with it." She returned home and canceled the automatic payments to her mother's account, each click on her banking app, bringing a sense of finality. When her mother called to demand an explanation, Lily simply said, "You've got Tommy. Let him take care of you now." For the first time in years, Lily felt free. The financial burden was gone, but more importantly, so was the emotional weight of trying to please someone who would never see her worth. She wasn't angry anymore. She was done. As she looked toward her future, she knew one thing for certain. She would never again let herself be defined by someone else's love or lack of it. After cutting financial ties with her family, Lily felt an unfamiliar yet exhilarating sense of freedom. Without the weight of their demands, she began to focus fully on her career, throwing herself into new projects and steadily climbing the ranks at her consulting firm. Each paycheck felt like a step closer to her dreams. She opened a savings account and started setting aside money for something she'd always longed for, a home of her own. It wasn't just about having a place to live. It symbolized independence, a fresh start free from the shadows of her past. Meanwhile, back home, things began to unravel. Without Layla's monthly contributions, her mother and Tommy struggled to keep up with the bills. The once pristine house fell further into disrepair, and the tension between them grew. Tommy, still refusing to find steady work, spent his days gaming and his nights drinking with friends. His fiancée ate candy, quickly lost patience with the situation, and eventually left, taking whatever little hope their mother had clung to with her. Lily heard bits and pieces of their downfall through relatives and mutual acquaintances, but she felt no desire to reach out. For the first time in her life, she wasn't weighed down by guilt or the need for her mother's approval. Instead, she focused on her own happiness and growth. She began taking evening walks, picking up hobbies she'd once loved, and even planning trips with friends, experiences she'd never allowed herself before. One evening, as she sat on her balcony overlooking the city skyline, Lily reflected on how far she'd come. She thought about Richard, his unwavering support and gentle encouragement, and felt a wave of gratitude. His memory was a steadying presence, a reminder of her strength and worth. "You've got this, Lily," she whispered to herself, imagining his proud smile. The toxic ties that had once defined her life were finally severed, leaving space for peace and clarity. Lily had spent so many years searching for love and validation from her mother only to realize she didn't need it. She had built a life on her own terms, one filled with purpose, independence, and the quiet assurance that she was enough. As she gazed at the stars, Lily felt a deep sense of peace settle over her. For the first time, she wasn't looking back, only forward. Her future was her own, and she was ready to embrace it fully.